is a great honor to have you, and I appreciate you called. He called. I don't know where he got my number, but I picked up.
There were articles, printed sheets of paper with people lifting body bags.
This is not someone who is making sound judgments based on actual evidence.
Hi, David. It's good to see you again at a very busy time in the US.
Hi, Reged. Great to be here.
Now, you were part of the press pack in the Oval Office as the South African president sat down with Donald Trump. Can you just set the scene for us in terms of what you saw? Because it was pretty extraordinary.
We're lined up outside the Oval Office, a mix of Americans and South Africans and me, with some White House staff, and then we get ushered in, and it's all pretty noisy and chaotic. South African journalists are not shrinking violets, and we crowd in, and there is Elon Musk standing behind a sofa, for example, and I walked around the Resolute desk, and the White House staff are very eager that we don't touch it, but I did spot the red button that Donald Trump presses when he wants to order a Diet Coke. And we gathered round.
That does
exist. It really
exist.
is true. Yeah. Thank goodness it's only a Diet Coke. And we all sort of clustered round.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a great honor to be with the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa.
And then Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, started talking.
He is a man who is certainly in some circles really respected, other circles a little bit less respected, like all of us, in all fairness, like all of us.
We all like
At that point, I did not notice to my left a giant TV monitor, but as we all discussed, that was going to come into use.
And what was Ramaphosa's demeanour in that meeting?
The Oval Office itself has changed now somewhat. Trump has blinged it up. He's turned it into a mini Mar-a-Lago with lots of gold everywhere, golden cherubs, gold leaf, gold on the fireplace. And the walls are overcrowded now with portraits of past presidents, many with gold frames. In the midst of all this, Ramaphosa, I would say, had a cool and calm demeanour, maybe a faint air of bemusement.
We are essentially here to reset the relationship between the United States and South Africa.
He knew he had come into the lion's den, but he was ready for it, and he had a backup team of South Africans with him.
I thought it was interesting when he said, I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you. What was he suggesting?
That was a very telling moment. And actually, since then, some columnists have written this may be the defining phrase of a decade of Trump diplomacy. This was a reference to Qatar actually giving Trump a plane worth $400 million, a gift which Trump has accepted. And many critics have said this is the most outrageous example of corruption possibly in presidential history. But what was telling was, Ramaphosa said this with a bit of sarcasm in his voice. I wondered if he might get into trouble for it with Trump and J.D. Vance and others. He missed the sarcasm at his expense. It showed you he's not sharp enough to understand that this was satire and mockery at his expense. But people have seized on it as an example of this is where we're living now. Trump is vulnerable open to gifts from foreign leaders, and every world leader has seen an example of Qatar and said, well, if we can bribe this guy with a plane, we can get something for ourselves.
One of the most extraordinary elements, I use that word a lot, extraordinary these days, but the moment that we've been talking about is when Donald Trump showed videos and footage to the South African president. And one of the things that he showed Cyril Ramaphosa was video of what Donald Trump claimed were graves of more than 1,000 white farmers marked by white crosses. Do we know if there's any truth to that footage and those images that Donald Trump was putting to the president?
That's right. It'd been a fairly convivial 20 minutes. Trump had made a wry comment about, Ramaphosa being respected in some circles and not in others. It was rambunctious. Some South African journalists and, of course, Americans were yelling questions, but all went well. But this topic inevitably came up of the alleged white genocide in South Africa. And of course, it was not so long ago that just a couple of weeks ago that the US actually accepted around 50 so-called white refugees from South Africa. And this was the real gotcha moment that Donald Trump was hoping for. It was very reminiscent of a James Bond villain as he suddenly turned to his staff and said, dim the lights and let's watch this film. And sure enough, the lights did go down, and I was standing near a White House aide who had a laptop that she activated, and it was plugged into the TV. And for nearly 5 minutes, we watched this film with this footage of South African politicians singing apartheid-era slogans about killing the farmers.
These are burial sites right here. Burial sites, over 1,000 of white farmers.
And yes, this drone footage, as you say, of these white crosses on a roadside. Now, at the time, Donald Trump more than once said this was a burial site, as if there were literally the corpses of white farmers under these crosses in this ground. That is categorically not true. As you'd expect, journalists in South Africa were quickly onto this, and Ramaphosa himself said at the time he'd never seen this film before. He was curious to know where it was. And sure enough, the sleuths, the detectives, the journalists found out that this is not a burial site at all. That is not the case. It is a memorial site. It was erected several years ago because of one incident of white farmer fatalities in that area. And these crosses were not marking actual graves. They were more a symbolic gesture representing dead farmers going back years. I don't know if that memorial is even still there in that current form, but it's been absolutely debunked. It was not a memorial, a burial site, and a member of the farmer's family was interviewed on American radio a couple of days later and confirmed that.
What about some of the rest of what Donald Trump showed Cyril Ramaphosa? There were articles, printed sheets of paper with people lifting body bags. Was there any truth to Donald Trump's claim that they were white farmers being buried?
No, that has also been thoroughly debunked. In the most notorious example, a newspaper cutting, a printout that he showed with a photograph, that was actually taken in the Democratic Republic of the Congo from its recent conflict with Rwanda. That photo was not from South Africa at all. And again, the fact checkers have been all over that, but the White House refuses to acknowledge these blatant errors and the fact it's spreading disinformation.
Before your time as Washington, D.C. bureau chief, you were the Guardian's Africa correspondent for a number of years. You were based in South Africa. Do you know what the origin is of these claims of so-called white genocide that Donald Trump was talking about?
Yeah, they started pretty soon after the end of racial apartheid in 1994. Extremist white groups who did not want to transition to democracy and have Nelson Mandela as the first black president push these conspiracy theories. These were fringe, militant, extremist groups that didn't get much of a voice, but they were always there. I think, as in so many other arenas that we see, the real game changer was the rise of the internet and social media. These conspiracy theories were allowed to spread fast and far and wide. And of course, they are given fuel by some genuine events on the ground in South Africa. It does have an extremely high crime rate. My recollection when I was there between 2009 and 2015, the crime rate was about 49 murders a day. The vast majority of the victims were black. And in my own life, I saw it. I lived in a house with a big, high wall and an electric fence. If you accidentally triggered your burglar alarm, then armed security guards would sweep into your garden and shine a torch through your window, checking you're okay. I only had one incident in all my time in South Africa when a guy tried to snatch my phone. Nothing came of it, but certainly I knew other journalists, friends, neighbors who had incidents of one kind or another. So crime is real, and some of the people in the Oval Office made that point, but it's not a conspiracy against white farmers, as Trump had bought into. South African police just released the crime statistics for the first quarter of this year, and they said there had been 6 murders on farms. 5 of the victims were black and 1 was white.
It must have been really uncomfortable for Cyril Ramaphosa to sit there and watch that footage and those articles, given he was jailed as part of his struggle against apartheid.
Yeah, I think we should give him credit for tremendous self-restraint. I mean, he grew up under a vicious, brutal apartheid regime, fairly humble origins. He became a student organizer. He spent time in solitary confinement in prison. He was a lead negotiator at the end of apartheid as democracy dawned. He was an acolyte of Nelson Mandela. I thought he channeled some Mandela, just zen and wisdom and calm during that interchange. But what happened in the 90s was there was political liberation for the black majority, but not economic liberation. And you hear some commentators say the biggest surprise, the extraordinary thing, is just how patient the black population still is after all these indignities, all these injustices that continue to this day with immense poverty and deprivation for many. So yes, I mean, it would be incredibly galling to sit there and be lectured about your own country by a man who has the backing of white nationalists in America, who, as far as I know, has never set foot on the African continent.
I thought some of the figures you gave, as you've been writing about this, that white South Africans are 7% of the population but still own 72% of the land, just shows you that disparity that South Africa is still working with. I mean, as you describe it, there's no evidence that there is this so-called white genocide. So how did it metastasize into this right-wing conspiracy in the US?
I think the internet played a big part, and Donald Trump, in his first term, engaged with this issue. He put out some tweets about it then, at the same time, of course, that he was also referring to African countries and Haiti as shithole countries, as he said at one point. I think a key player in it was Tucker Carlson, former Fox News host, now a right-wing media personality. He gave a big platform to this conspiracy theory of a white genocide in South Africa, in the same way that, he does think laterally. He looks at countries like Hungary and Russia and praises what they're doing. He's quite engaged in international affairs, but in a very conspiratorial way.
And Donald Trump, of course, watched a lot of Fox News.
Exactly, yes. And Tucker Carlson in particular has sometimes literally picked up the phone to Trump and tried to persuade him on one policy or another. So I suspect Carlson was a big player, but of course, more recently, the other key figure here is Elon Musk, who was standing in the Oval Office during this meeting, but said nothing, interestingly. But let's remember Musk is himself, of course, a white South African by birth, grew up in the apartheid era, has his own frustrations now with South Africa over not being able to do business there. And I think it's pretty likely he too has been feeding Trump some of this nonsense. He's certainly been tweeting it himself, and has had a very, very negative effect in that way.
Don't go anywhere, because we've got much more Full Story after the break. Until then, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I feel like I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, which is, what is in Donald Trump's mind when he does things like this? It's not really a fair question, but I guess it's, what is his audience? Is he really talking to South Africans and Cyril Ramaphosa, or is his audience back home?
I think his audience is back home. Many things that Donald Trump does are all about his base of support. And that base is predominantly white. I think it would be consuming Tucker Carlson and Fox News and sharing this interpretation that white farmers are the victim of a genocide there. A lot of Trump is about divisive racial rhetoric, allegations of reverse racism and wokeism and so on. I think he's always looking for that message that his supporters will even something like the tariffs that is always pitched as I'm going to help the forgotten workers.
So it's a bit of tapping into that white grievance in order to maintain his base.
White grievance, white resentment, the portion of the white population in the US who feels they have been marginalized. Life is not as good as it used to be. When they go to Trump rallies, he tells them things were better in the 1950s and 60s. So let's make America great again. Who's the scapegoat? Who are going to blame for this? It's going to be the immigrants, people of color. And so without having to say it very explicitly, there is that rhyme, that notion that you as white Americans with your grievances can identify with white South Africans with their grievances. The black population is taking over with wokeism and taking your jobs and so on. And I think that's the message he, rather unsubtly conveys.
There's definitely an element as well of a show of that ruled by reality television, lots of drama. But what are the real world consequences when there is a US president, someone in a very powerful position, basing his international relations on false information?
Oh, it's incredible that such a man could be running the world's most powerful country. It's remarkably dangerous. He is not making decisions based on actual evidence and reason. It's often based on, what he watched on Fox News, what some conspiracy theorist whispered in his ear in the last 5 minutes. A classic example domestically, of course, was the 2020 election when he believed the lies that the election was stolen from him. That led to the January 6th insurrection.
He has formed, certainly, with conspiracy theories.
He certainly does. It's very worrying in terms of, what does it mean for peace and security? What does it mean for Ukraine's war in Russia? What does it mean for the Palestinians in Gaza? This is not someone who is making sound judgments based on actual evidence.
What about what it means for US influence going forward? Are we going to see nations just turning away because they don't feel like the US is a serious player anymore?
I think there's certainly a danger of that. Donald Trump is doing tremendous damage to the American brand. I suppose some in Washington will take consolation that these leaders are still coming for now. And
yes,
you've seen Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Volodymyr Zelensky, Mark Carney of Canada, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, all running the gauntlet of this dreadful Oval Office meeting, this kind of reality TV show diplomacy. And I think probably their domestic audiences cut them some slack. On the one hand, they don't like the sycophancy, the fawning. On the other, they think to themselves, yeah, but the other guy has nuclear weapons and the world's biggest economy, so you've still got to talk to him. You've still got to cut a deal. But sure, I think you're already seeing some evidence of countries trying to look elsewhere for trade deals, try and find another model. Certainly there are critics of Trump who really feel strongly that a country such as South Africa will be even more tempted to do its business with China, with other parts of the world, because the US is no longer a stable and reliable player. And this conspiratorial thinking really does undermine America's own interests.
Yeah, that you paint a picture of a slow but inevitable turn away from the US. David, it's a really busy time for you as a journalist based in the US, but thank you so much for taking us through just the latest in developments with Donald Trump and American politics.
Great to be here. Thank you.